Number 1.
Jennifer Kesse was 24 years old and living in Orlando, Florida. She worked as a financial analyst for Central Florida Investments timeshare company and had recently purchased a condo. On January 23, 2006, Jennifer left work at 6 p.m. and called her father on her way home at 6:15 p.m. She also called her boyfriend, Rob Allen, at 10 p.m. later that night when she was home. Neither of them noticed anything amiss during their conversations. On January 24, two things out of the ordinary happened. Jennifer always communicated with her boyfriend Rob, either by telephone or text message before she left for work, but she did not contact him at all that morning. Rob tried contacting her multiple times that day, but all his calls went straight to voicemail. She also failed to show up for work that morning, although she had an important meeting. Her co-workers became concerned because they knew it was very unlike her to miss work without giving them notice, and they contacted her parents to let them know of her absence. That's not Jennifer. Jennifer has always been reachable. When I got that phone call, I knew intuitively something happened to her. Upon receiving the news, Jennifer's parents Joyce and Drew Kesse drove 3 hours from their house to her condo to search for her. At her condo, they saw nothing out of the ordinary of someone getting ready to leave for work in the morning. There were still puddles of water in the shower, a damp towel, work clothes laid out on her bed, and hair and makeup items out in the bathroom. Given this scene, police began to think that Jennifer was abducted either during the time it took her to walk to her car or on her way to work. Jennifer's boyfriend and parents were both ruled out as suspects, and her ex-boyfriend was interviewed and ruled out as well. Police found it unlikely that she would have left on her own, as she appeared to have a stable life, was in a committed relationship and had recently returned from a vacation with her boyfriend. Police started to investigate the many construction workers in the area her apartment complex was located in. The complex was only half finished at the time Jennifer moved in, and a number of workers lived on site. Joyce also remembered her daughter mentioning how she sometimes felt uncomfortable because the workers would catcall her. Police investigation does not lead to any new information though. On January 26, a big break came after seeing Jennifer's story on the news. A resident called police to inform them of a car sitting in the parking lot of their apartment complex. The car was a black Chevy Malibu, which matched the one that Jennifer owned. The car was located roughly a mile away from Jennifer's complex, and when police searched the car, they did not see any sign of a struggle. Police also obtained surveillance footage of an unidentified person walking in the parking lot at the same time Jennifer's car was left in the lot. The footage proved to be extremely frustrating as the camera was programmed to snap photos every 3 seconds, and each time a frame was captured, the suspect's face was obstructed by a gate post. The only thing police can determine for sure is that the suspect was between 5'3" and 5'5" inches tall. Since Jennifer's disappearance, there has been no activity on her ATM card or calls from her cell phone. Police extensively searched the areas of Jennifer's known whereabouts, but with no success. In 2018, 12 years after Jennifer's disappearance and with no new leads, Joyce and Drew Kesse decided to investigate on their own as well. After a successful fight in court to obtain all the files regarding Jennifer's case, they are now using their own private investigator to search for Jennifer. On November 8, 2019, after a tip from the Kesse family investigator, police spent 2 days at Lake Fisher in Orange County searching for clues. The lake is located 13 miles from Jennifer's condo. The search was prompted by a tip from a woman who remembered seeing something odd at the time of Jennifer's disappearance. A man drove a pickup truck to the lake and took out a 6 to 8 foot piece of what looked like rolled-up carpet and dumped it in the lake before driving off. Police have not disclosed any other information from this search, or if they have found anything significant. Police and Jennifer's parents continue to search for her.
Number 2.
Crown Prince Rudolph was the heir to the Habsburg throne and the only son of Emperor Franz Joseph and his beautiful wife Elizabeth, or Kesse. He was in a notoriously bad marriage to Princess Stephanie of Belgium, daughter of Leopold II. At first, the prince seemed to be in love, but Stephanie suffered under her mother-in-law's scorn. The elegant Kesse referred to Stephanie as a clumsy oaf. Rudolph and his mother were more alike in their ideals than his very conservative father, however, their relationship was not close. On January 29, 1889, Rudolph attended a family dinner with his parents before they were to leave for Hungary. Rudolph excused himself, headed for Mayerling for a day of shooting with his current mistress, the 17-year-old Baroness Mary Vitsera. What happened after that is anyone's guess. What we do know is on January 31st, Rudolf's valet, Leszek, went to his rooms at Mayerling to call him, and there was no answer. Rudolf's shooting partner, Count Joseph Hoyes, joined in and still got no response. Hoyes became concerned and got an axe and broke down the door. What he found was terrifying. Rudolf was seated at the side of the bed, motionless and with a trickle of blood running from his mouth. Mary was lying on the bed, ice cold and rigid. The heir to the throne was dead with his mistress. The discovery of two bodies in a rural hunting lodge outside Vienna shook the world. The Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Prince Rudolf, and his lover, Baroness Marie Vitsera, lay side by side in a cabin in the village of Mayerling. They had been shot to death. The mystery surrounding their deaths started when Prince Rudolf's father, Emperor Franz Joseph, put out an order that the tragedy be covered up. This was most likely because Rudolf was having an affair with Vitsera despite being married to a Belgian princess. In order to keep the affair under wraps even after the two lovers died, Marie Vitsera's body was whisked away and buried in secret. Since the church would not allow a proper funeral for a suicide victim, nobody even mentioned that this was a possibility. Instead, a rumor was spread that Rudolf had been poisoned by his enemies. However, the emperor later told the pope that he suspected Rudolf must have killed himself and Vitsera during a bout of temporary insanity. The pope allowed a Catholic burial. Only after the emperor died in 1916 did the true details of the couple's deaths come to light. By then, many outlandish rumors about the incident were doing the rounds. More than 100 years later, the speculation has not stopped. Theories include murder-suicide, a politically motivated killing, or a cover-up after Vitsera's relatives shot Rudolf to death during a drunken brawl. It is likely that the only two people who knew the truth died in that lodge.
Number 3.
Cheryl Grimmer was a 3-year-old toddler who was kidnapped on 12 January 1970 from Fairy Meadow Beach in Wollongong, Illawarra, New South Wales, Australia. She had been in the beach shower block when witnesses claim a man took her and ran off. It is believed that she was strangled to death around an hour after her abduction in the nearby suburb of Balgownie. 7-year-old Ricky was the last person to see his sister Cheryl Grimmer alive, yet police investigating her disappearance in 1970 never once took a statement from him. Cheryl's disappearance had been an unsolved crime mystery for over 45 years until a suspect was arrested and charged in March 2017. He pled not guilty. His trial was expected to take place at the Supreme Court of New South Wales in May 2019. However, a ruling by the judge in the case declared some evidence inadmissible, and the charges against the suspect were subsequently dropped in February 2019. On the morning of 12 January 1970, the Grimmer family went to the beach at Fairy Meadow in Illawarra, except for Vince, who was away working as a sapper for the Australian Army. When the weather turned at 1:30 p.m., Carol decided it was time to go home. The children all went to the shower block together whilst Carol packed up their belongings. Ricky went back to Carol 10 minutes later, saying that Cheryl was refusing to come out of the shower block. She followed Ricky back to the shower block moments later to find that Cheryl had disappeared. There was no phone nearby, so Carol made her way to a house on nearby Elliott's Road and asked them to call the police. At the time, witnesses claimed that a man was seen holding Cheryl up to drink from a water fountain and then ran off with her wrapped up in a towel. The claims are now seen as unlikely. Cheryl's brother, Ricky, recalled picking up his sister so that she could drink from the fountain, and it is thus believed that witnesses mixed the two occurrences. It was also claimed that she was spotted in a white car. Cheryl's disappearance sparked a massive manhunt. A day after investigations began, the New South Wales police announced that they had 4 theories as to Cheryl's whereabouts. That she was hiding and had fallen asleep, that she had wandered into the ocean and was carried away by currents, that she had fallen into a waterway, or that she had been kidnapped. After a day of searching, all but the latter were dismissed, and they began pursuing other leads, such as a blue Volkswagen Type 2 van, which had been spotted near the scene of the crime. On the 3rd day, police received a note demanding $10,000 and stating that the child was unharmed. They staged a drop for the money in Bully, but the kidnapper never showed despite police earnestly believing the note to be credible. They disguised themselves as council workers for the ransom drop and originally feared that this led to the kidnapper being spooked and that the large police operation may have deterred them from coming forward. However, the writer never contacted police again, and it was assumed the note was a practical joke. The case became famous in Australia, and the family relocated back to England for 10 years afterwards to escape the notoriety. Although the police had 3 main suspects, none could be positively identified as the man witnesses saw. Just under 18 months after Cheryl's disappearance, in 1971, a local teenager, then 15 or 16, confessed to abducting and killing her. The man gave an overview of what occurred that day, describing a tubular steel gate, a cattle guard, a track, and a small creek near the scene of the murder. He brought police to a corner of Brokers and Balgownie roads and claimed the body was buried there, but noted that the area had undergone residential development and he thus couldn't be sure. Police interviewed the owner of the property, who contradicted the suspect's description and stated that there was no cattle guard in place at the time of the murder and that there had never been a tubular gate of any kind. Such inconsistencies eventually led to police concluding that his confession was false, with a police report at the time, written by Detective Sergeant Philip Finley, stating on the whole it is considered without some material evidence to directly connect him with the missing child, it would not be desirable to take any action against him in respect to this matter at this time. In spite of numerous appeals and a $5,000 reward offered by the New South Wales government, there was no breakthrough in the inquiry, and the case went cold. In 2016, a review of the evidence was carried out, and all of it, including witness statements, was computerized for the first time. The review uncovered many leads and brought to light information that appeared to have not been pursued thoroughly enough in the original investigation, particularly the 1971 confession. Police returned to the property where the teenager alleged that he had committed the murder and questioned the owner's son, who, contradicting his father, said that the cattle guard was certainly in place at the time and that he recalled a tubular gate as well as a track leading over a creek into the property. On 23 March 2017, it was announced that a man had been arrested in the Melbourne suburb of Frankston at 1 p.m. the previous day and was being extradited from Victoria. He was charged with Cheryl's abduction and murder at Wollongong Police Station and was incarcerated at the Silverwater Correctional Complex. Police stated that it is unlikely that Cheryl's body will ever be found, as there has been substantial development of the once rural area. In the 47 years since the abduction in May 2017, it was revealed that the suspect who was arrested in March was the same person that had confessed to Cheryl's abduction and murder in 1971 and had been dismissed due to inconsistencies.
Number 4.
Brittanee disappeared while on a spring break trip to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, in 2009. She traveled south with friends without her parents' knowledge or permission. On the third day of her trip on April 25, 2009, she walked more than a mile from the hotel where she was staying to visit a friend at another resort. She stayed briefly before leaving to return to her own hotel room, but never made it back. The last image of the teen is security camera footage of her walking out of the Bar Harbor Motel wearing a multicolored shirt, black shorts and flip-flops. FBI agents in 2016 said they believed the teen was kidnapped, sexually assaulted and fatally shot. Friends of Brittanee Drexel weren't immediately concerned that the 17-year-old didn't return to their Myrtle Beach hotel on April 25, 2009. The group had gone their separate ways for much of their time in South Carolina. Her boyfriend at the time, who was back home in Monroe County, became worried when she stopped answering texts that night. He reached out to a family friend, a Marine stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, who drove to Myrtle Beach and filed a missing person report with local police. The friends she traveled to Myrtle Beach with were not people Brittanee knew extremely well. Some people in the group stayed an extra day to help search but returned to Rochester the next day. Initially, police started looking for the missing teen in the Myrtle Beach area. Tips came in that a person matching her description had been seen on a bus and at a convenience store, but both leads were unfounded. A signal from Brittanee's cell phone initially prompted searches in the Georgetown County area, about 35 miles south of Myrtle Beach. Dozens of searches occurred there in the first few years. The trail eventually went cold. A secluded property in a small town more than 100 miles away from Myrtle Beach, Jacksonboro, South Carolina was searched by the FBI. A now abandoned trailer on the site is where Drexel spent her final days. This was following a claim from jailhouse informant Taquin Brown, who is identified as an eyewitness by the FBI. The trailer belonged to Brown's uncle, Herman, and sits on a 4-acre overgrown lot 130 miles away from where Drexel was vacationing in Myrtle Beach. Brown says Drexel was held there, that she was killed there, and that she was ultimately buried there for a period of time. Asked whether the FBI believes Brown's account, FBI agent Don Wood said, "That's a piece of information. As with all pieces of information we gather in this case, we're assessing, looking into, evaluating." As for Drexel's death, Brown says he and a friend witnessed it while walking to Herman's house in late May 2009. Brown says he saw a group of men with Drexel outside, including a man he only identified as Nate. Nate shot her with a double-barrel shotgun 2 times, Brown said. He said they turned around and left so as not to be implicated, but claims he knows what they did with her body. After she was killed, some of her remains were buried in a garden area, and after some time went by, they removed it from the garden area, Brown said. He said he was there when her remains were dug up. He says some of them were taken to a gator-infested pond, others placed in a stolen RV and taken to a scrapyard.
Number 5.
The port city of Gothenburg has always been Sweden's gateway to the world. This was especially true in the decades following World War II, when the rebuilding of Europe created a huge demand for Swedish wood, steel and industry products. Geir Karlsson, 22, Jan-Olof Dahlsjö, 21, and Kjell Johansson, 16, pictured here, from left to right, were 3 friends who found work in this environment, at shipyards and industries. They were loyal and trustworthy to their friends and families, but were also known to get into trouble with the police for minor crimes. Sometimes they carried surprisingly large amounts of money. They were last seen on the rainy Thursday morning of July 29, 1965, driving a midnight blue Volvo PV 444 that belonged to Jan-Olof Dahlsjö's brother, even though none of them had a driver's license. All 3 of them were reported missing at different times, and it took months until the police could confirm that they disappeared at the same time. They had salaries waiting for them that were never collected. All of them had girlfriends, and Kjell, the youngest, even became a father shortly before the disappearance. They had been heard planning to go on a camping trip together to the village of Asa south of Gothenburg. But the weather was especially bad that day and not suitable for camping, and they didn't tell anyone that they were leaving on that day. Extensive searches of bodies of water in and around Gothenburg have turned up nothing that indicates that they crashed into the water somewhere. The 4th person that went missing from Gothenburg that day was Hubner Heim Lundqvist, 18, an art student from Stockholm. He spent the summer of 1965 with his family at their summer residence in Torekov in the south of Sweden, but got bored and said that he wanted to travel to Lysekil, north of Gothenburg, where a collective of artists resided. The path to Lysekil goes through Gothenburg, and he either hitchhiked his way there or took a train. He left his family on the morning of July 29 and arrived in Gothenburg sometime during the day, where he sent a postcard to his parents that read, "All is well, don't worry." This is the last trace of him. 2 men, one of them dressed as a woman, stormed the bank at Gamlestadtorget in Gothenburg shortly after 2 p.m. on the same day, firing wildly into the ceiling with submachine guns. A bank customer, that happened to be a wrestler, tackled one of the robbers to the ground. This caused the robber to shoot himself in the leg, but the robbers managed to leave the bank with a loot of 18,000 kroner. Bank employees chased the men to see where they went. The robbers scrambled down to the nearby river and stripped away their clothes, revealing scuba gear underneath. The bank employees tried to hinder the men by throwing rocks at them, but the robbers fired back with volleys of gunfire, forcing the pursuers to retreat. The robber, who accidentally shot himself, stayed stationary under the murky water for several hours, hindered by his wounded leg, while the other one slipped away with the money. Both of them and a 3rd accomplice got caught by police eventually. All 3 of them were Hungarian citizens who fled to Sweden after the unrest in Hungary during the 1950s. The parents of Heim, the missing art student, always believed that he left the country to work on the high seas. 2 Swedish sailors have reported speaking with a young Swedish man of similar appearance in the late 1960s, once in Singapore and once in Australia. But these sightings are unconfirmed. A weird observation was made by the sister of Geir Karlsson, one of the missing dock workers, some time after his disappearance. She went to look for her brother at his apartment, but a stranger opened when she knocked at the door. The young man in front of her was dressed in a knitted sweater that she had made for her brother. The stranger was visibly stressed and told her to look for her brother in the pub district. Police, reporters and amateur detectives have tried to connect the dots between the cases for more than 50 years, but all attempts have failed.
Number 6.
Scientist Ettore Majorana was born in Italy in 1906. He famously went missing, presumed dead on 27 March 1938, aged 32. It was claimed he disappeared or vanished suddenly under very mysterious circumstances while going by ship from Palermo to Naples. Almost 20 years later he was photographed in Argentina, still looking the same age as he was in 1938. Whilst rumors of his death circulated, nothing was ever proved until 2011. On March 2011, the Rome Attorney's Office announced an inquiry into a strange statement made by a witness about a meeting with Majorana in Buenos Aires in the years after World War II, in which he claims Majorana disclosed a number of major scientific discoveries. The witness also claimed that when he went back to meet Majorana a second time, he had disappeared and could therefore not provide more details on the scientific discoveries. On June 7, 2011, Italian media reported that the Carabinieri's RIS had analyzed a photograph of a man taken in Argentina in 1955, finding 10 points of similarity with Majorana's face. They stated the picture was almost certainly Majorana, whom has vanished almost 20 years before the picture was taken. The odd thing was, Majorana looked almost the same age in the pictures from 1938 as he did in 1955. The Carabinieri made no comments about his lack of aging. Ettore Majorana was a brilliant scientist, engineer and mathematician, as well as a theoretical physicist who worked on neutrino masses. The Majorana equation and Majorana fermions are named after him. In 1937, Majorana predicted that a stable particle could exist in nature that was both matter and antimatter. In our everyday experience, there is matter, which is abundant in our known universe, and antimatter, which is very rare. Should matter and antimatter meet, they both annihilate, disappearing in a flash of energy. Did he try some strange experiment that had him disappearing in a flash of energy, only to reappear instantly in a flash 20 years later? Rumors have been swirling around about his disappearance since the very moment he failed to step off the boat that he was spotted boarding in March 1938. However, even this single concrete detail in the case, that Majorana stepped onto a boat, is in dispute. Some believe he deliberately placed a decoy on the boat. Others think the boat trip was simply a fabrication of those he left behind, who knew of his true fate but wanted some evidence of his disappearance.
Number 7.
Tammen was last seen in Old Fisher Hall, a former Victorian mental asylum converted to a dormitory at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio on April 19, 1953. He was a resident hall advisor at Fisher Hall and lived in room 225. At 8 p.m., he requested new bedsheets because someone had put a dead fish in his bed. Sometime around 8:30 p.m., Tammen apparently heard something outside his room that disturbed him and went out into the hallway to investigate. He never returned. His roommate came in at 10 p.m. and found him gone. The roommate originally assumed Tammen was spending the night at his Delta Tau Delta fraternity house and did not report his disappearance until the next day. There is no indication that Tammen left of his own accord. His clothes, car keys, wallet, identification, watch, high school class ring and other personal items were left behind in his dormitory room, and he also left the lights on, the radio playing, and a psychology textbook lying open on his desk. Curiously, he had actually dropped his psychology course 3 weeks earlier. His gold 1938 Chevrolet sedan was not taken from its place in the school parking lot. He left his bass fiddle in the back seat of the car, and he left behind $200 in his bank account. He is believed to have had no more than $10 to $15 on his person the night he disappeared and was not wearing a coat. However, authorities have not found any indication of foul play in Tammen's disappearance either. They do not believe he could have been forcibly abducted, as he was large enough and strong enough to defend himself against most attackers. They theorized that he could have developed amnesia and wandered away, but if that was the case, he should have been found relatively quickly. A woman living outside of Oxford, 12 miles east of the Miami University campus, claims that a young man came to her door at 11 p.m. the evening Tammen disappeared and asked what town he was in. Then he asked directions to the bus stop, which she gave him, and he left. However, the bus line had suspended its midnight run, so he could not have gotten on a bus. The witness says the man she spoke to was disheveled and dirty and appeared upset and confused. He was not wearing a coat or hat, although it was a cold night and there was snow on the ground. He was apparently on foot, since the woman did not see or hear a car. The man matched the physical description of Tammen and was wearing similar clothes, but it has not been confirmed that they were the same person, and Tammen's brother stated he did not believe the man the witness saw was Tammen. 5 months to the day before Tammen vanished, he went to the Butler County Coroner's office in Hamilton, Ohio, and asked for a test to have his blood typed. The coroner claims that this was the only such request he ever got in 35 years of practice. It's unknown why Tammen wanted the test done and why he did not have it conducted in Oxford, where local physicians or the university hospital could have typed his blood for him. He was scheduled for a physical examination by the Selective Service for induction into the Army, but inductees did not need to know their blood type in advance of the physical. Tammen's parents, who lived in the 21,000 block of Hillgrove Avenue in Maple Heights, Ohio in 1953, last saw him a week before he disappeared and say he did not appear to be troubled by anything at the time. He was on the varsity wrestling team in college, played in the school dance band, and was a business major and a good student. He dated at the time that he vanished but did not have a steady girlfriend. Jennifer Wenger, a Miami University alumnus, began researching the Tammen case in 2010 and spent 9 years trying to solve his case. She doesn't think Tammen died around the time of his disappearance and thinks he lived for an extended period, perhaps as long as 42 years, which would place his death sometime in 1995. She bases this conclusion on the fact that the FBI discarded Tammen's fingerprint records in 2002. Regulations allow them to destroy fingerprint records 7 years after a person's death. Wenger believes Tammen's psychology professor was involved with the CIA and that Tammen may have been recruited into the agency. In the decades after Tammen's disappearance, students at Miami University claimed his ghost haunted Fisher Hall. His parents are now deceased. Fisher Hall was torn down in 1978 and an extensive search was conducted in the rubble for Tammen's remains, but no evidence was located. His youngest 2 siblings are still alive and hope for answers in his case. His disappearance remains unsolved.
Number 8.
On October 18, 1984, 3.5-year-old Laura Bradbury was on a camping trip with her family at the Indian Cove campground in the Joshua Tree National Park, California. They were a family of 5, cramped in a 2-bedroom condominium, so Joshua Tree offered a break. They were regular visitors with parents Patty and Michael. She went with her 8-year-old brother, Travis, to the portable restrooms near the campground and left Laura outside while he used the facilities. When he came out, Laura had vanished. Over 250 people along with horses, dogs and helicopters searched for Laura in the Joshua Tree National Park. A dog followed her scent for about 2 miles before losing it. After only 3 days, the official search was called off. The Bradbury family mobilized their own massive effort, distributing millions of flyers and T-shirts with Laura's likeness on them. They also appeared on radio and television talk shows, and the disappearance was reenacted twice on national television. A hotline was established to gather tips and field inquiries. The search for her became a national story, and Laura was one of the first missing children to be featured on milk cartons. Witnesses claimed to have seen a man in his 50s with a metallic blue van at Indian Cove campground just before Laura disappeared, and a similar-looking man was seen near Burns Canyon a few hours later. The sheriff's department even brought in a hypnotist to try to coax out more details from campers who had seen the bearded, pot-bellied man and his van. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department had investigated Laura's disappearance. But Mike had lost faith in the deputies and he'd mounted his own search. Mike grew increasingly contemptuous of sheriff's deputies for not doing enough about the many tips that flowed into the Laura Center. They were incompetent or lazy or both, he told reporters. He even speculated that someone inside the department knew that a kidnapper was involved and was covering it up. Mike heard the story of Clifford LaVille and Toby Santangelo, who were said to have told deputies they had solid information about a man they believed kidnapped Laura. But investigators checked it out and found it not credible. Not long afterward, LaVille and Santangelo were found shot to death. Along with a private investigator, he combed the isolated communities near Joshua Tree, known for attracting drug dealers and oddballs. His hunt, too, came to nothing. In 1986, a skull believed to be that of Laura Bradbury was found by hikers near the park's west entrance, only 2 miles from the family's campsite, some reports say 5 miles. However, DNA tests were unable to conclusively prove that the skull was Laura's, not even blood type or gender, and the only certainty was that it was a child. A sheriff's captain publicly speculated it was Laura's and had a theory. Maybe, he said, she meandered away from the toilet, stumbled and was somehow buried by collapsing sand. Only recently, he continued, coyotes or a mountain lion had dug up all that was left. In 1990, new DNA tests were said to prove the skull was Laura's with 99% likelihood of a match. Laura's mother Patty died in 2001, and her father Michael wrote a book about his daughter's disappearance called Laura Ann Bradbury: A Father's Search in 2010. Michael Bradbury has been trying to have the skull transferred from the coroner's facility to a mortuary since October 2009. But because the San Bernardino County Coroner's Office has not issued a death certificate, he has been unable to claim his daughter's remains. In a 2010 interview he said he was shown about 40 color 35mm slides of the skull and was astonished to find out it is a full-sized skull, about 7 inches by 5 inches, missing the teeth and lower jaw. He claimed that investigators showed him a much different skull shortly after hikers discovered the remains. "My wife and I were shown a smaller 3-inch skullcap in or around 1986-87 that the sheriffs claimed was Laura's skull," he said. "The two skulls are totally dissimilar, they look nothing like each other. I wonder now, what or whose skull they showed me then? And why?" He also had a report on tests that provided inconclusive results on whether the cranium was his daughter's. According to the report, only one of 4 DNA tests performed on the skull matched DNA samples from Laura's mother's blood. Even hair taken from Laura's hairbrush did not match DNA with the skull, he said. The 2 partial skull bones are the only remains Michael was aware of that are believed to be from his daughter. "I am very anxious to put closure to this terrible period of my life," Bradbury said. "All I want is justice for my daughter. That's all I care about." No arrests have ever been made, and the case remains unsolved.